Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we are setting out on a pretty ambitious intellectual journey. We're going to trace the grand story of how the Western mind, over about 4 centuries, fundamentally changed how it thinks about truth.
It's a journey that I think is indispensable for understanding the modern world because it's really the story of a search for authority. For millennia, humanity looked outward, to the church, to the king, to tradition for answers.
Right, for what was true, what was right.
Exactly. But the story we're diving into today is the chronicle of a massive shift inward. It's about the attempt to find a stable, reliable center of authority inside the human mind itself.
It really is this incredible narrative of construction and deconstruction. We're looking at a chain of 5 huge philosophical movements: rationalism, empiricism, then the Enlightenment,
Which tries to put them together.
and then the reaction to that, existentialism, and finally the shadow that, kind of follows all of them, which is nihilism.
And it's so important to see them as a chain. They don't exist in a vacuum. The solution that one generation comes up with becomes the core problem for the next generation to solve.
So the big theme here, the core movement we're tracing, is this transfer of authority, right? From the objective world out there to this objective experience in here.
That's it. Our sources frame it as the conquest of the many over the one. The focus moves from this big abstract idea of man to you, the concrete, living, breathing individual. And maybe the most critical part is what's called the elimination of the middleman.
What do you mean by that, the middleman?
The priest, the professor, the king, the people who interpreted truth for you. This whole trajectory is about putting the burden of figuring things out squarely on your shoulders.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to follow that line. From the absolute certainty René Descartes was hunting for, all the way to the crushing freedom of the existentialists, and then that dark abyss of nihilism that waits at the end.
And we want to make sure you walk away with more than just a list of definitions. We're going to synthesize this to show why it created modern science, why it's the bedrock of our political freedoms, and, why it's also responsible for that very specific anxiety that feels so central to modern life.
It's a huge story, but it's one that explains so much about our world. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's start this journey in the 17th century. The old medieval world, with its reliance on the church, is really starting to fracture. Philosophers knew they needed a new, solid bedrock for knowledge, but they split almost immediately into 2 camps.
The rival twins of certainty, as they're sometimes called. It's a fantastic way to frame it.
It really is. So let's start with the first twin, rationalism, the citadel of reason, the idea that the answers are found by looking inward.
Rationalism is, at its core, a complete commitment to reason. It asserts that our opinions, our actions, everything has to be based on reason and logic, not on, religious dogma or feelings or what our senses tell us. And the reason they distrusted the senses is so intuitive, isn't it? I mean, we've all seen a stick look bent when you put it in a glass of water.
Exactly, or a tower in the distance that looks round, but when you get up close, you see it square.
So if your senses can fool you about something as simple as a stick, how could you possibly trust them to tell you the truth about God or justice or the nature of the cosmos?
You can't. That was their conclusion. They decided that genuine knowledge had to have 3 qualities. It must be necessary, universal, and eternal. And the only way to get that kind of knowledge is a priori meaning, independent of any experience. It has to come from the pure intellect.
And this whole project was really driven by their admiration for mathematics, right?
Oh, completely. The mathematical ideal is the key to the whole rationalist mindset. Think about a triangle. The fact that its angles add up to 180 degrees is true everywhere, for all time.
It doesn't matter if you draw a sloppy triangle in the sand or a perfect one on a computer. The truth is the same.
That's the kind of certainty they were after. They looked at the beautiful, unassailable logic of geometry and said, we need to apply that rigor to everything.
So who's the architect of this grand project? Who really kicks off this modern inward turn?
Well, that would be the man who essentially founded modern philosophy, René Descartes. And his quest was, it was terrifyingly ambitious. He wanted to sweep away every single thing he thought he knew.
Just to find one thing he could be absolutely sure of.
One single guaranteed point of certainty.
He called it methodological skepticism, and he really took it to the extreme. He starts by doubting his senses. He says, okay, I think I'm sitting by the fire, but I've had dreams that felt just as real. So out goes sensory data.
Then he takes it even further. He imagines this powerful, malicious demon, an evil genius, whose entire purpose is to deceive him about everything.
Even about math. The demon could be tricking him into believing that 2 + 2 = 4 when it really doesn't. It's the ultimate paranoid thought experiment.
But the goal wasn't just paranoia. The goal was to find a belief that was so fundamentally true that even an all-powerful demon couldn't make it false. And he finds it.
He finds it in the act of doubting itself.
Precisely. He realizes that even if this demon is deceiving him, even if all his thoughts are false, he cannot doubt that he is the one who is thinking and doubting.
And that leads to the most famous line in philosophy.
Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. That's it. That's the one indubitable point of certainty he was looking for. The thinking subject, the I.
And that single move just completely reorients Western thought. Because he doesn't start with God. He doesn't start with the world. He starts with the self.
The self-conscious individual becomes the foundation for all knowledge. But then, of course, he has a problem. How does he get back out of his own head?
Right. If the only thing you know for sure is that you exist, how do you prove anything else exists?
He needed a bridge. And he found it in what he called innate ideas. He argued that certain concepts in our minds, ideas like God, perfection, infinity, are just too grand, too perfect to have come from our flawed, finite experiences.
You can't see infinity walking down the street.
Exactly. So where did the idea come from? Descartes argued it must have been implanted in our minds by a creator. It's the ultimate rationalist move, trusting the logic of an idea over direct observation.
And in doing this, by separating the mind, the res cogitans or thinking thing, from the body and the physical world, the res extensa or extended thing, he gives the intellect total autonomy. He carves out a space for the mind that is independent of the messy, deceptive physical world.
And if Descartes built the blueprint for this citadel of reason, the next major figure, Baruch Spinoza, built the fortress to its absolute logical conclusions.
Spinoza's ambition is just. It's breathtaking. He takes Descartes' project and tries to make it as rigorous as a geometry textbook.
His major work, Ethics, is written using the geometric method more geometrico. It's not a normal philosophy book. It starts with definitions, axioms, and postulates.
It's just like Euclid.
Just like Euclid's Elements. And from that foundation, he logically deduces hundreds of propositions and corollaries about God, the mind, human emotions, everything. He treats reality like a mathematical proof.
For Spinoza, then, real knowledge isn't about what you see or feel. It's about understanding this deep, rational structure of the universe, seeing things, as he put it, under the aspect of eternity.
Subspecie eternitatis.
Right.
Sensory experience is what he called mutilated or confused knowledge. It's just the surface. The real truth lies in the logical system underneath.
And he radicalizes Descartes in a huge way. Descartes had two substances, mind and matter. Spinoza says no.
He collapses it all into monism. He argues there is only one substance in the entire universe, and he calls it God or nature, deus natura.
So everything, my mind, this table, the stars, your emotions, it's all just a different mode or a modification of that single infinite substance.
Yes. And if that's true, it leads to a very radical and for many people a very disturbing conclusion: determinism. If everything is just a necessary part of this single rational system, then nothing happens by chance. Everything is predetermined.
So where does that leave human freedom? I mean, if every choice I make is just a necessary ripple in this giant substance of God or nature, am I really free?
Spinoza has to completely redefine freedom. For him, freedom isn't the ability to choose otherwise. That, he says, is an illusion born from not understanding the causes that determine you.
So what is real freedom then?
True freedom is the rational understanding of that necessity. You become free when you understand why you must do what you do. You're free when you're determined by your own inner nature, your reason, instead of being tossed around by external passions and forces you don't understand.
That is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
It is. But the lasting legacy of rationalism, especially through Spinoza, is this powerful idea, the principle of sufficient reason, the belief that for every fact, there is a reason why it is so and not otherwise, that the universe is, in principle, completely understandable.
An idea that is, still the engine driving almost all of modern science.
But while all of this was happening on the continent, this intense inward-looking system building, a totally different philosophical mood was taking hold across the Channel in Britain.
This is our second twin, Empiricism.
Yeah.
And it looks in the complete opposite direction, outward.
It's the direct counterargument. The core assertion of empiricism is that all knowledge, without exception, comes from sense experience. It's all post-experience. The mind doesn't start with innate ideas. It starts as a blank slate.
A tabula rasa.
Exactly. And the person who really set the stage for this was Francis Bacon. He was less of a pure philosopher and more of a prophet for a new scientific method.
He looked at the philosophy of his time, the scholastic tradition, and saw them as just playing games with words, lost in abstract logic.
He found it completely sterile. He said we need to stop deducing things from ancient books and start observing nature directly. So in his book, The Novum Organum, or New Method, he champions induction.
Which is the bottom-up approach.
The bottom-up approach. You start by meticulously, systematically gathering specific facts from observation, and only then do you try to form general laws based on that data. No more armchair philosophy.
But Bacon was also really smart about the problems with observation. He knew the observer isn't a perfect machine.
And this is where his thought is still so relevant today. He warned about what he called the idols of the mind. He said the human mind is like a distorted mirror that twists the reality it reflects, and you have to be aware of these built-in biases.
It's such a brilliant taxonomy of human error. He talks about the idols of the tribe.
Which are the biases that are just part of being human, our tendency to see patterns where there aren't any, for instance.
Then the idols of the cave, which are your own personal biases from your upbringing and education.
Right. And then he talks about the idols of the marketplace, which are distortions that come from the sloppy use of language, how words can mislead us. And finally, the idols of the theater.
Which are the false philosophical systems of the past that we just accept without questioning.
His message was clear. Doing good science is hard, because the biggest obstacle to seeing the world clearly is your own mind. You have to clean out the rubbish first.
And then the person who really builds the full philosophical system for empiricism is John Locke.
Right. If Bacon was the prophet, Locke was the systematizer. In his essay concerning human understanding, his first job is just to completely demolish the idea of innate knowledge.
His argument is so practical and, well, empirical. He says, look, if there were universal truth imprinted on our minds at birth, then wouldn't everyone know them?
Wouldn't children and what he called idiots, wouldn't they possess these truths? But they clearly don't. He says the only explanation is that the mind starts as a blank slate, a tabula rasa.
So if the slate is blank, how do we write on it? How do we get ideas?
Locke lays out this whole anatomy of understanding. It starts with simple ideas. These are the raw bits of data that come in through our senses. The color red, the feeling cold, the taste sweet.
And the mind is passive here. You can't invent a new color.
You can't. You can only receive what the senses give you. But then the mind becomes active. It starts to combine, compare, and abstract those simple ideas to form complex ideas.
So it's something like justice or government.
Or even a unicorn. A unicorn is a complex idea made by combining the simple ideas of a horse and a horn. Every idea, no matter how abstract, has to be traceable back to simple sensory inputs.
And critically, Locke gives the new physical sciences of his day, people like Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton, the philosophical justification they needed.
He does this with his famous distinction between primary and secondary qualities. This is a huge deal.
Okay, break that down for us.
Primary qualities are the properties that are inherent in the object itself, whether we're perceiving it or not. Things like its size, its shape, its motion, its solidity. These are the things science can measure objectively.
But secondary qualities are different.
Secondary qualities are the powers that an object has to produce a sensation in us. So, color, smell, taste, sound. The redness of a rose isn't actually in the rose.
It's the interaction between the light waves reflecting off the rose and our eyes and brain.
Precisely. The redness is in your mind. This was a brilliant move because it allowed science to focus on the objective, measurable, mathematical primary qualities of the world, while still acknowledging the reality of our subjective experience of the secondary qualities.
So by the end of the 17th century, you have these two powerful competing systems. Rationalism, saying truth is in the logic of your mind. Empiricism, saying truth is in the data from your senses. Both are looking for certainty, but they're completely at odds.
And that tension, that contradiction, is exactly what the 18th century, the Enlightenment, sets out to resolve. This was a period of incredible intellectual optimism, a genuine belief that human reason, if applied correctly, could solve any problem.
It's more than just a philosophy, isn't it? It's a whole cultural mood. The motto of the era was Sapere Aude.
Dare to know.
Dare to know. It was a command, a challenge to individuals to stop relying on the authority of the church or the king and to think for themselves.
And the greatest intellectual achievement of the Enlightenment was figuring out how to fuse those two rival systems, rationalism and empiricism, into something new and incredibly powerful.
The analytical method, which is, I mean, it's basically the engine of all modern science.
It is. It's the perfect marriage of the two. Instead of choosing one, they said, let's use both in the right order.
So you start with the inductive phase.
Which is pure empiricism. You go out into the world like a good Baconian and you gather facts, you make rigorous, unbiased observations, you collect the data, you look outward first.
But you don't stop there with just a pile of facts. Then you move to the deductive phase.
Exactly. Now you put on your rationalist hat. You use reason and logic to look for universal mathematical laws operating within that data you've collected. You try to find the hidden rational structure.
And once you propose a law like Newton's law of universal gravitation, you don't just accept it.
No, you use deduction to predict other consequences. You say, okay, if this law is true, then this other thing should happen. And then you go back out and test it empirically. It creates this powerful self-correcting loop.
And Isaac Newton was the hero of the age because he proved that this method worked on a cosmic scale. He took the seemingly chaotic heavens and showed they were just a giant, elegant machine running on simple, universal mathematical laws.
And the thinking of the Philosophists, the Enlightenment thinkers, was, well, if reason can tame the heavens, surely it can tame human society.
Which brings us to the moral core of the Enlightenment, this radical idea of autonomy.
The historian Peter Gay summed it up perfectly. He said the era insisted on man's essential autonomy. The idea that the individual is not a pawn of fate or divine will. You are responsible to your own rational interests and to the welfare of others.
And this was a huge seismic break from the past, specifically because it meant rejecting the Christian dogma of original sin.
That rejection was truly revolutionary. The philosophers argued that human nature isn't fundamentally broken or corrupt. It's either good, or at the very least, it's neutral and perfectible.
And that one shift in thinking changes everything. Because if we're not born broken, then the responsibility for all the suffering and injustice in the world.
It shifts from God's mysterious plan to human ignorance and bad social structures.
And that leads directly to what you could call the secularization of salvation.
Yes. If people are perfectible and reason is powerful, then improvement salvation, in a sense, doesn't come from prayer or divine grace. It comes from human effort.
Through education, through scientific discovery, through political reform.
The responsibility for the human condition was transferred entirely from the divine to the human, and that is the philosophical foundation for modern secular democracy, for the idea of human rights, for the very belief that we can and should actively try to make the world a better place.
It's the moment in our story where humanity basically declares itself grown up. But with that autonomy comes an enormous and maybe even a frightening level of responsibility.
It does, and the energy of this era was spread by this incredible network of public intellectuals, the philosophers.
Let's talk about a few of them. We have to start with a really complex figure, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He sort of has one foot in the Enlightenment and one in the Romanticism that would follow.
Rousseau is famous for arguing that man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. He believed that civilization actually corrupts our natural goodness. But his solutions were deeply rational and political. His book, The Social Contract, introduces this idea of the general will.
Where true freedom is found by obeying laws that you, as part of the collective, give to yourself. It's a tricky concept.
Very tricky, and it has been used to justify both democracy and totalitarianism. But it shows this deep engagement with how to structure a rational society.
Then you have someone like Christian Wolff in Germany, who's this great systematizer.
Wolff is crucial because he wrote philosophy in German, not just Latin. He made these complex rationalist ideas accessible to a much broader public. And he also showed how dangerous these ideas could be.
He was banished from Prussia, wasn't he?
He was, because his deterministic views, which he inherited from Spinoza, were seen as a threat to religious orthodoxy and the state. It shows these weren't just academic debates. They had real-world, high-stakes consequences.
And maybe the ultimate political act of the Enlightenment was the Encyclopedia, edited by Denis Diderot.
The Encyclopedia was super odd, made into a set of books. The goal was to compile all human knowledge from philosophy to blade making and make it available. It was a political statement.
A declaration that knowledge is the property of everyone and that reason, not tradition, is the highest authority.
Diderot himself was a materialist and an atheist. He truly believed that this project, this collection of knowledge, would be the tool to liberate humanity from superstition and tyranny.
And if you want to see that materialist, atheist side of the Enlightenment pushed to its absolute limit, you look at Paul H.D. de Holbach.
Holbach's salon in Paris was the hub for the most radical thinkers. His book, The System of Nature, was known as the Bible of materialism. It flatly denies the existence of God, the soul, free will, everything supernatural. It argues that humans are purely physical beings governed by the laws of nature, full stop. It's the most uncompromising version of a purely autonomous, secular world.
And amidst all this radical certainty, you also had voices pleading for tolerance, like Gotthold Ephraim Lessing.
Lessing was worried about the dogmatism he saw on all sides. His famous play, Nathan the Wise, tells the story of 3 rings, 1 real and 2 fake, given to 3 sons. The rings represent Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
And no one knows which is the one true ring.
Exactly. His point was a beautiful plea for humility and brotherhood. He argued that the truth of faith might not be something you can prove with rational certainty, so we should treat each other with compassion instead of fighting over dogma.
So the Enlightenment builds this magnificent rational system. It gives us science and the ideal of autonomy. But what happens when that system starts to feel too big, too cold, too abstract? What happens when the individual feels crushed by it?
That feeling of being crushed, of being suffocated by the system, is precisely the feeling that gives birth to existentialism. It really gets going in the 19th century and then explodes in the 20th.
It's a reaction against everything that came before. The Enlightenment's promise of a neat, orderly, rational world just wasn't matching up with the reality of mass society, industrialization, and these huge, all-encompassing philosophical systems like Hegel's that basically erase the individual.
So existentialism emerges as the great anti-system. It doesn't say reason is useless for science, but it screams that your subjective, lived experience, your hopes, your fears, your anxiety cannot be explained away by some grand, abstract theory.
It puts the focus squarely back on the unique, isolated individual, trying to make their way in what often feels like a hostile or just plain indifferent universe.
And this is what our sources mean by the conquest of the many over the one. For centuries, philosophy was obsessed with the one, the abstract, universal essence of man or truth.
Plato's forms.
Exactly. The individual person was just seen as a flawed, temporary copy of that perfect universal idea.
But existentialism flips that completely on its head. It says the many, the concrete, unique, subjective individuals, are what's real and what matters. The focus is no longer on what man is in general, but on what I am doing, right here, right now.
And this whole shift is captured in the most important concept of the movement. Existence precedes essence. If you get this, you get existentialism.
Okay, let's use an analogy. If I'm a carpenter and I want to make a paper knife,
Right.
I have a concept in my mind first. Its purpose, its shape, its design. The essence comes before the object exists.
Right. The paper knife is an object with a predetermined nature. But for a human being, the existentialists argue it is the exact opposite. You are thrown into the world first. You simply exist.
With no blueprint, no pre-written instruction manual from God or nature.
None. And it is only through your choices, your actions, what you do with your life that you create your own nature, your own essence. You exist first, and then you define yourself. You are a subject, not an object.
And the consequence of that is just staggering. It means you are radically, terrifyingly free.
Completely free. And because there's no preordained human nature, when you choose for yourself, you are in a way choosing for all of humanity. You are creating an image of what a human being ought to be. That's a heavy burden.
Now, one of the most fascinating things about existentialism is how it spread. It had this unique delivery method that, as our sources say, eliminated the middleman.
Yeah, this is a really cool point. Usually a philosopher writes a dense academic book, then maybe years later a playwright or a novelist comes along and translates those ideas into a story for the public.
The artist is the middleman.
But existentialism couldn't work that way. Because its core topics, anxiety, dread, freedom, anguish, are subjective emotional states. You can't capture the feeling of dread in a dry, objective, scholarly paper. It needs to be felt.
So the philosophers had to be the artists.
They had to be. They used novels, plays, and poetic works to demonstrate the philosophy, not just describe it.
Let's take the first one, the father of the movement, Søren Kierkegaard. He hated Hegel's all-consuming system because he felt it annihilated the individual.
So he didn't write a straightforward critique. He wrote under all these different pseudonyms, each with their own personality and viewpoint. He wrote parables and strange, ironic stories.
Why do that? Why not just say what he means?
Because for him, truth is subjectivity. He wanted to force you, the reader, out of your comfortable objective position. He wanted you to have a personal, subjective encounter with the ideas. You don't just read about the leap of faith, you're forced into a position where you have to make one yourself just to understand the book.
Then you have someone like Friedrich Nietzsche. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was a composer. And he wrote his philosophy, like Thus Spoke Zarathustra, in this powerful, poetic, prophetic style.
He knew that a statement like God is dead wasn't a logical premise, it was a cultural earthquake. And it needed the force of a poem or a prophecy to convey its true, devastating meaning.
And of course, in the 20th century, you have Jean-Paul Sartre. He becomes the public face of existentialism, and he does it through his plays, like No Exit, and novels like Nausea.
Those weren't just illustrations of his philosophy, they were his philosophy. The concept of bad faith isn't just an idea in a textbook, it's a character on a stage lying to themselves and you watch it happen. This is why existentialism seeped into the broader culture, into film and art so quickly.
It eliminated the academic middleman and spoke directly to people's lived experience.
Let's look a bit closer at these titans, starting with Kierkegaard. His main target was the comfortable, state-run Christianity of his day, which he saw as completely inauthentic.
For him, faith wasn't about intellectually agreeing to a set of doctrines.
Not at all. He argued that you can never have objective, rational proof for the existence of God. There's always a gap, and to cross that gap requires a leap of faith, a passionate, subjective commitment made in the face of uncertainty.
Then we have Nietzsche, who took the Enlightenment's own tools, its commitment to reason and truth, and showed how they would ultimately destroy their own foundation.
Right. His famous declaration, God is dead, wasn't a celebration. It's often misunderstood. It was a warning, a diagnosis.
He was saying that Western culture, through science and rational critique, had killed the belief in a transcendent, objective source of morality and meaning, but it hadn't yet faced the consequences.
He saw a vast, empty space opening up, and he predicted it would lead to centuries of nihilism. His proposed answer to this crisis was the Übermensch, or the Overman.
Not a Superman in a cape.
No, not at all. The Overman is a creator, a person who, facing this meaningless void, has the courage and the strength to create their own values, to define their own morality, to embrace what he called the will to power, the fundamental drive to grow, create, and master one's own life.
And finally, that line of thought leads to Jean-Paul Sartre, who really strips away any of that creative optimism and focuses on the pure, raw anguish of freedom.
Sartre puts it so bluntly. If there is no God, there is no divine plan, no human nature. Therefore, we are condemned to be free.
Condemned. That's such a powerful word choice. Freedom isn't a gift, it's a sentence.
It's a sentence because it comes with the weight of total responsibility. You didn't choose to be born, but from the moment you are responsible for everything you do. There are no excuses. You can't blame your parents, your society, your genetics.
And when you try to run away from that freedom, that's what he calls bad faith.
Yes, mauvaise foi. And this is something everyone does. It's when we pretend we're an object instead of a subject. It's the waiter who acts like he is nothing but a waiter, a cog in a machine.
Or the person who says, oh, I had no choice, I had to do it.
That's the classic example of bad faith. You are denying your radical freedom to choose otherwise. You're trying to hide from the terrifying fact that you are totally and completely responsible for who you are.
So existentialism leaves us here with this beautiful but absolutely terrifying vision of total freedom and total accountability.
So we followed this arc, from the search for objective, absolute certainty with the rationalists, all the way to the celebration of subjective, absolute freedom with the existentialists. The question is, what happens if that project goes wrong? What if, after you dismantle all external authority, the individual fails to create their own meaning to fill that void?
The answer is the final stop on our journey, nihilism.
Our sources define it as the total rejection of established laws and institutions. It's the philosophical dead end that says if there's no objective truth, then there's no objective value or meaning.
And from there, you can go one of two ways. Either everything is permitted,
or nothing matters. Both paths lead to a void.
It's important to distinguish between the two main forms.
Yeah.
First, there's philosophical nihilism,
which is really a form of extreme skepticism. It's the idea that we can't be certain of anything, that all knowledge is impossible. It takes Descartes' doubt and turns it on everything, including the self. It concludes with nothingness.
And then there's the more active and maybe more famous form, political nihilism.
This is the revolutionary drive to destroy. It's the belief that society, the state, All existing institutions are so corrupt that they must be annihilated. It's the philosophy of the bomb thrower.
And this isn't just a theoretical idea. It became a very real, very terrifying movement in 19th century Russia.
The term nihilist really gained its power there. It was used to describe radical student movements who completely rejected the authority of the Tsar, the Orthodox Church, the entire old world.
They believed that you couldn't reform the system. It was rotten to the core. You had to burn it all down to clear the ground for something new.
But what started as intellectual dissent quickly turned violent. These groups embraced terrorism and assassination as legitimate political tools. For them, destruction was a creative act.
And this movement has a clear, dramatic endpoint: the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881.
That event sent shockwaves across the globe, and it cemented in the popular imagination the image of the nihilist as someone defined purely by negation, by a fanatical will to destroy the existing order.
But our sources point to an even darker evolution of this idea in the 20th century, something that goes beyond politics into a kind of metaphysical destructiveness.
It's described as a total and absolute destructiveness, especially toward the world at large and including oneself. This is the abyss that Nietzsche saw coming. It's what happens when the denial of value turns inward and seeks to negate existence itself.
And the most chilling example of this is the power-mad nihilism that marked Hitler's last years.
Yes. In the final months of World War II, as it became clear that Germany had lost, Hitler issued what became known as the Nero Decree in March 1945.
This was an order for the complete destruction of Germany's own infrastructure: bridges, railways, factories, communication lines, everything.
On the surface, it was a scorched earth military tactic. But everyone around him, including his own minister, Albert Speer, who refused to carry it out, saw it for what it was: a philosophical statement of total negation.
His logic was that if the German people had failed to win, they had proven themselves unworthy to exist.
It's the ultimate act of power-mad nihilism. If my will cannot dominate the world, then the world, including my own people, deserves to be destroyed. It's the denial of the value of existence itself. This is the ultimate danger, the final dark consequence of the path that began with that hopeful search for certainty.
So we have traveled through 4 centuries of Western thought. We started back in the 17th century with the rival twins, Rationalism and Empiricism, both desperately seeking a solid ground for truth, one inside the mind, the other in the outside world.
Then the Enlightenment came along and brilliantly synthesized them into the analytical method, which gave us modern science. And just as importantly, gave us the moral idea of autonomy, the belief that we can and should perfect ourselves and our society through reason.
But the giant, impersonal systems that grew out of that felt oppressive. And so Existentialism arrived to shatter that universal order, to champion the subjective individual, and to give us this profound but heavy insight into radical freedom and total responsibility.
And we ended by looking into the abyss, the ultimate danger that lurks at the end of this path: nihilism.
Yeah.
The negation of all value, which can curdle into a desire to destroy the world and even oneself.
The great challenge of our time, it seems, is still living within the tension created by this story. How do we hold on to the Enlightenment's respect for truth and progress, while also honoring the existentialist profound respect for individual freedom, all without sliding into that nihilistic void?
That is the tightrope we all walk. And that leads us to a final thought for you, our listener, one that builds directly on what we've discussed. We talked about how existentialism had such a massive cultural impact because it eliminated the middleman.
It forced people to confront these big ideas directly, through art, not through some academic filter.
Exactly. It made the philosophical personal and experiential. So the question for you is this. We are all surrounded by middlemen today. News aggregators, social media algorithms that create echo chambers, academic jargon, political pundits who tell us what to think.
The list is endless.
It is. So what personal middleman in your own life, what intellectual or moral interpreter that you rely on must you eliminate to directly confront your own condition, to define your own subjective truth without the comfort of an external authority telling you what it is?
That right there is the challenge that this entire 400-year journey has left on our doorstep.
It's the mandate of the modern world.
We hope this deep dive has given you some powerful new tools to think about that challenge. Until next time.